Otis Langston had waited decades for this night, the revival of his most famous play at the theater where his career first took root. He dressed with care, tucked a treasured playbill into his pocket, and stepped into a world he helped shape. But at the ticket booth, a young clerk didn't see a legend. She saw an old black man with no place there. What began as a simple refusal, a no reservation, no entry, would awaken a wound Otis had buried long ago. And what they didn't know was that he still held the power to rewrite the ending. Quick question before we start. Are you a watch while folding laundry type or more of a headphones in, lights off kind of listener? Tell us how you watch these in the comments below. This story's got a twist you won't see coming. If that sounds like your kind of thing, go ahead and subscribe right now. Otis Langston stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting his burgundy bow tie with fingers that had typed thousands of lectures and penned award-winning plays. At 75, his movements were slower but deliberate, like the careful placement of words in a script. "Tonight's the night, Eleonora," he whispered to the framed photo of his late wife. Her smile still warmed him after 15 years gone. They're finally reviving Autumn's Requiem at the Olympia. The Grand Olympia Theater had been the crown jewel of the city's arts district for nearly a century. For Otis, it held memories deeper than most knew. He brushed invisible lint from his tweed jacket and placed his flat cap at just the right angle. Not too formal, not too casual. From his desk drawer, he removed an aged playbill, yellowed at the edges. April 17th, 1968. The first time a play written by a black playwright, his play, had ever graced the Olympia's stage. He tucked it into his inner pocket, close to his heart. His phone buzzed with a text from his granddaughter Zora. "Can't wait to see the play with you tonight. Meeting you at the theater at 7. Otis smiled. Zora was the bright light of his retirement years, fierce, brilliant, and bound for greatness in her law career. She'd never seen his most famous work performed live. Tonight would be special for them both. Before leaving, Otis paused at his bookshelf, running his fingers across the spines of his published works. Critics had called him the quiet revolutionary of American theater. Students still studied his plays in universities. Yet he could still walk down most streets unrecognized, something that occasionally proved both blessing and curse. The taxi dropped him at the corner of Hampton and Vine. The Olympia stood majestic against the darkening sky, its marquee lights glowing against white stone columns. Otis felt a flutter in his chest, part excitement, part memory. The last time he'd entered these doors was for the theater's centennial gala 5 years ago. Before that, he'd avoided the place for decades after certain events. But tonight was about healing old wounds, about coming full circle. People streamed toward the entrance, couples in evening wear, groups of students, theater enthusiasts clutching programs. Otis joined the flow, drinking in the familiar smell of polished wood and velvet seats that waited inside. At the box office window, a young woman with pin-straight blonde hair and heavy eyeliner glanced up from her phone. Her name tag read Jessica. She barely made eye contact as Otis approached. "Good evening," Otis said, his professor's voice clear and measured. "I have tickets reserved under Langston." Jessica tapped at her computer with long manicured nails. "Langston," she repeated, not looking up. "I don't see anything." "I reserved them 3 weeks ago," Otis explained. "2 tickets for Autumn's Requiem. My confirmation email." "Sir, if they're not in the system, they're not in the system." Jessica cut him off, her voice taking on an edge that wasn't present when she'd helped the young couple before him. A line was forming behind Otis. He felt the weight of impatient gazes on his back. "Perhaps you could check again," he asked. "Otis Langston." Langston. Jessica sighed dramatically. "Like I said, nothing." "Maybe you got the date wrong." Her tone suggested this was entirely his fault, his aging mind's confusion. Otis reached for his phone to show the confirmation, but Jessica was already looking past him. "Next, please." "Excuse me, but I haven't finished," Otis said, his dignity holding firm though something old and familiar twisted in his gut. "I have the confirmation right here." "Sir, you're holding up the line. You can step aside and purchase new tickets if you want to see the show." Behind him, someone huffed impatiently. Ahead of him, through the glass doors, Otis could see the framed poster of his own play, his name in smaller print than he remembered. Very well, he said, reaching for his wallet. 2 tickets, please. Jessica looked at the cash in his hand and frowned. I'm sorry, but we're actually sold out now. Otis watched as she turned to the next customer, a young white couple, with a suddenly bright smile. How can I help you tonight? We need 2 tickets for Autumn's Requiem, the man said. Of course. That'll be $85 each. Otis Langston stood perfectly still, the conversations around him fading to white noise. Jessica had just sold tickets she claimed didn't exist to the couple behind him. His hands, which had written lines that moved audiences to tears, trembled slightly at his sides. Excuse me, he said, his voice steady despite the heat rising in his chest. You just told me you were sold out. Jessica's smile vanished. Sir, I explained the situation. Your reservation isn't in our system. That wasn't my question, Otis countered. You said you were sold out, yet you sold tickets to these folks. The couple glanced uncomfortably between Otis and Jessica, clutching their newly printed tickets. We must have had a cancellation, Jessica said, her voice cooling several degrees. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other customers. Otis had faced this dance before, the shifting excuses, the dismissive tone. At 75, he recognized the choreography of discrimination all too well. I'd like to speak with your manager, he said. Jessica rolled her eyes, not even attempting to hide her irritation. She picked up a phone, speaking in hushed tones. Otis waited, aware of the stares from the line behind him, the mixture of impatience and discomfort. A middle-aged white man with a neatly trimmed beard and a name tag reading Bradley Whitman, manager, emerged from a side door moments later. He approached with a practiced smile of someone accustomed to handling difficult patrons. Is there a problem here? Bradley asked, directing his question to Jessica rather than Otis. This gentleman claims he had a reservation, but there's nothing in the system, Jessica explained. He's insisting we're lying about being sold out. Bradley turned to Otis with a patronizing smile. Sir, our ticketing system is quite accurate. If your reservation isn't showing up, perhaps there was an error when you made it. We'd be happy to help you find tickets for another night. There was no error, Otis replied. And your employee just sold tickets to the couple behind me after telling me you were sold out. Bradley's smile didn't waver. Sometimes last-minute seats become available. It's a dynamic system. Just then, Otis heard a familiar voice call his name. His granddaughter Zora was pushing through the crowd, her braids bouncing as she approached. Grandpa. Sorry I'm late. She stopped, taking in the scene. What's going on? They're saying I don't have tickets, Otis explained. Despite my confirmation, Zora's eyes narrowed. At 28, she had inherited her grandfather's dignity, but none of his patience for injustice. She pulled out her phone. I have the email right here, she said, displaying the screen to Bradley. Confirmation number and all. 2 tickets for tonight's performance, purchased weeks ago. Bradley barely glanced at it. As I explained to your grandfather, if it's not in our system, there's nothing we can do. Perhaps you entered the wrong email when purchasing. Both of our emails are on the confirmation, Zora said, her voice rising. This is ridiculous. People are being seated right now with tickets they bought minutes ago. A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation. Jessica stared determinedly at her screen, avoiding eye contact. I'm going to have to ask you both to step aside, Bradley said, his pleasant facade cracking. You're disrupting other patrons. Otis placed a calming hand on Zora's arm. He'd seen the flush in her cheeks, the righteous anger building. She was a fighter, his Zora, but some battles required strategy over force. Let's go, he said quietly. Grandpa, no. This is. Not here, Zora. His tone left no room for argument. Otis turned to Bradley, straightening to his full height. You should know that this theater and I have a long history, Mr. Whitman. One you do well to research. Bradley's smirk was unmistakable. Enjoy your evening, sir. As they walked away from the ticket booth, Zora was fuming. We can't just leave. That was blatant discrimination. I'm a law student, Grandpa. We could. Otis stopped beneath the grand marquee, the lights illuminating his face. There was no defeat in his expression, only calculation. Some lessons are taught louder than others, Zora, he said, pulling out his phone. This isn't the first time I've been turned away from the Olympia. What do you mean? Zora asked, confusion replacing anger. Otis didn't answer. Instead, he dialed a number from memory and waited. When someone answered, his voice changed, took on an authority that Zora rarely heard outside his former lecture halls. Lawrence, it's Otis Langston. Yes, it's been too long. Listen, I need a favor. It's about the Olympia Theater. No, I've reconsidered my position. It's time to make some changes. When he hung up, there was a glint in his eye that made Zora step back. Grandpa, what are you planning? Justice, Otis said simply. But first, I need to show you something. As they walked away from the theater, Otis didn't look back at the play poster bearing his name, the name Jessica and Bradley had failed to recognize. The name that, by tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to forget. Behind them, the theater doors closed on laughing patrons, none aware that tonight's performance would be the last under current management. The Grand Olympia stage was about to feature an unscripted drama, with Otis Langston as both playwright and director. Morning light filtered through the curtains of Otis Langston's study, illuminating dust motes that danced above stacks of leather-bound books. Zora sat across from him, still processing what he'd revealed the night before. So that's why the theater matters so much, she said, holding a faded photograph. It showed a much younger Otis standing proudly beside a luminous black woman in an elegant gown, Eleonora, Zora's grandmother, on opening night of his first play at the Olympia. Your grandmother's family helped save that theater during the recession of '75, Otis explained. The Wilsons were among the wealthiest black families in the city. When the Olympia was about to be demolished for a parking structure, Eleonora convinced her father to invest. They became silent partners. Silent because no one wanted to advertise that black money had rescued a white institution, Zora concluded. Otis nodded. Different times. We accepted certain compromises. The doorbell rang. Otis rose slowly, straightening his cardigan. That would be Lawrence. Lawrence Washington entered with a confident stride of a man 30 years younger than his 72 years. His tailored suit and silver-tipped cane spoke of success. The warm embrace he gave Otis spoke of friendship. It's been too long, old friend, Lawrence said. Though I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. He turned to Zora with a wide smile. You've grown into your grandmother's beauty and your grandfather's fire, I see. Lawrence sits on the Olympia's board of directors, Otis explained to Zora. Has for 15 years. Which makes last night's incident even more inexcusable, Lawrence said, his smile fading. I've already spoken with several board members. They're horrified. They settled the notices study. Lawrence pulled out an iPad, tapping through documents as he spoke. The theater's in financial trouble, Otis. Attendance down 30%. Corporate donations drying up. They've been desperately searching for new patrons. And meanwhile turning away old ones, Zora said pointedly. Lawrence nodded. The current management has been chasing wealthy white donors while ignoring the diverse audience that could save them. Bradley Whitman was hired specifically to attract old money, but he's alienated half the community. Otis leaned forward. What about my proposition? The board is receptive. Very receptive. Especially after I informed them who exactly was turned away last night. Lawrence's smile returned, tinged with satisfaction. Several nearly had heart attacks when I mentioned your name. What proposition? Zora asked. Otis and Lawrence exchanged a look before Otis answered. I've offered to purchase controlling interest in the Olympia Theater. Zora's eyes widened. You're buying the theater that rejected you? Technically, I'm buying back what should have been partly ours decades ago, Otis corrected. Your grandmother's family's investment was gradually diluted over the years. By the time she died, our connection to the theater was almost forgotten. Lawrence handed Otis a document. The board has already drafted terms. They're eager, desperate, really. Bradley has no idea what's coming. Otis studied the paper, years of contract negotiations making him cautious. And my conditions, all included as requested. Zora watched her grandfather's face transform as he read, determination solidifying into purpose. This was the Otis Langston few people saw, not just the dignified professor, but the strategic force who had navigated a hostile industry for decades. "So what happens now?" she asked. Otis looked up. "Now we wait. The fundraising gala is tomorrow night. Every major donor, every board member, and every staff person will be there, including those who turned you away," Lawrence added. "The perfect stage," Otis said quietly. After Lawrence left, Zora helped her grandfather prepare lunch. She couldn't stop thinking about the night before, the humiliation in his eyes that he'd tried to hide. "You could have told Jessica and Bradley who you were," she said. "Thrown your name and reputation in their faces right there." Otis sliced tomatoes with precise movements. And what would that have accomplished? Justice. Recognition. They treated you like any other black elder they didn't think mattered, Otis finished. "That's exactly the point, Zora. If I'd announced myself as the famous playwright Otis Langston, they might have changed their behavior. But only toward me." He set down the knife, turning to face his granddaughter fully. "I don't want special treatment because of my accomplishments. I want a world where no one is denied entry because of their skin color, whether they're a celebrated playwright or not." Zora considered this. "So this isn't about revenge. It's about change," Otis corrected. "Lasting change." That evening, as Zora was leaving, she paused at the door. "There's something I don't understand. If they're struggling financially, where are you getting the money to buy the theater?" Otis smiled, the small, private smile he reserved for memories of Eleonora. "Your grandmother was smarter than all of us. She left a trust specifically for this purpose. She always said someday the Olympia would need us again, and when that day came, we should own it outright. She knew this would happen. She knew people don't change unless they have to." Otis touched the wedding band he still wore. "Tomorrow they'll have to." As Zora drove home, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Historic Olympia theater cancellation sparked rumors of financial collapse. It had begun, just as her grandfather planned. Across town, in the Olympia's offices, Bradley Whitman stared at his computer in disbelief as another email arrived. "Donor withdrawal, effective immediately." The third such message today. No explanations given. Just withdrawals of financial support, one after another. His phone rang. The board chairman's name flashed on the screen. Something was happening. Something he couldn't control. And it had only just begun. Jessica Monroe arrived at work 2 hours early. The Grand Olympia Theater gleamed in morning sunlight, but her attention was fixed on the coffee stain spreading across her uniform blouse. She'd barely slept, jolted awake repeatedly by nightmares of angry patrons and vanishing tickets. Bradley had pulled her aside after last night's show. 3 major donors have withdrawn support. The Henderson Foundation, Westbrook Industries, and the Callaway Trust, all gone in one day. "What does that have to do with me?" she'd asked. His eyes had narrowed. The withdrawal started after that incident with the older black gentleman. "If I find out there's a connection," the threat hung unfinished. Now, Jessica scrubbed at the coffee stain in the employee bathroom. Tonight's fundraising gala was crucial. Bradley had made that abundantly clear. Every staff member would be evaluated. Budget cuts were coming. In other words, someone would be fired, and Jessica was the obvious target. The bathroom door swung open. Martina, one of the ushers, entered. At 58, she was the Olympia's longest-serving employee. "Morning, Jessica." Martina's tone was cooler than usual. "Morning," Jessica mumbled. "Crazy about the donors pulling out, right?" Martina studied her. "Is it crazy? Or predictable? What's that supposed to mean?" "I saw what happened with Mr. Langston last night." Martina's voice dropped. "Do you have any idea who that was?" Jessica's stomach tightened. "Just some guy without tickets." Martina shook her head slowly. "That some guy wrote the play you were selling tickets for." The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. "What?" "Otis Langston. The playwright. Autumn's Requiem is his most famous work." Martina's disappointment was palpable. "And you turned him away from his own show." Jessica's hands froze mid-scrub. "That's impossible." "The playwright is." She trailed off, realizing she'd never actually checked who wrote the play. "Black." Martina finished for her. Yes, and not just any playwright, one of the most important American dramatists of the last 50 years. His work opened doors for people like me in theater. Jessica felt sick. I didn't know. That's the problem, isn't it? Martina said, turning to leave. You didn't think you needed to know. Across town, Lawrence Washington steered his Mercedes into the parking lot of Wilshire Capital Partners. The firm's glass and steel headquarters rose 20 stories above the financial district. The receptionist recognized him immediately. Good morning, Mr. Washington. Mr. Chen is expecting you. Lawrence found David Chen reviewing documents in his corner office. At 39, Chen had become one of the city's most influential investment bankers and one of the Olympia Theater's biggest potential donors. Lawrence, Chen greeted him warmly. I was surprised to get your call after our discussion last week. Circumstances have changed, Lawrence replied, settling into a leather chair. I believe I told you the Olympia wasn't seeking new management. You did. Rather firmly. Chen smiled. Has the board reconsidered my offer? Not exactly. Lawrence placed a folder on the desk. We have a different proposition. One that involves your investment, but under new ownership. Chen raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Otis Langston is acquiring controlling interest in the theater. Chen's professional composure slipped. The Otis Langston? The playwright? Lawrence nodded. The same. And he's looking for partners who share his vision for the Olympia's future, a return to artistic excellence and community inclusion. Chen opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. His eyes widened at the numbers. These projected returns are ambitious. They're also achievable, Lawrence countered. The Olympia's current financial troubles stem from poor management, not poor potential. Otis understands what the theater could be. He's lived it. Chen leaned back, considering. The gala is tonight. Why the sudden urgency? Lawrence chose his words carefully. Let's just say there's going to be a change in leadership. Immediately. Those who recognize this opportunity early will have preferred positions. Understanding dawned in Chen's eyes. A coup. A correction, Lawrence amended. The theater is reverting to its rightful stewardship. As Lawrence left Wilshire Capital with Chen's preliminary commitment, his phone buzzed. A text from Otis. It's done. Paperwork signed. Across the city, in a wood-paneled conference room, Otis Langston handed his fountain pen back to his attorney. Before him lay the executed purchase agreement, the culmination of Eleonora's foresight and his patience. Congratulations, Mr. Langston, his attorney said. You now own 63% of the Grand Olympia Theater. Otis touched the document lightly. Thank you, Marcus. Has the board been informed? The chairman has. The formal announcement to the full board is scheduled for. Marcus checked his watch, approximately 15 minutes from now. Just before they inform Mr. Whitman. And the gala tonight will proceed as planned. As the new majority owner, you'll be expected to attend. Otis nodded, thinking of Jessica and Bradley, who still had no idea what was coming. They would learn soon enough. Back at the theater, Bradley Whitman paced his office, fielding increasingly panicked calls from board members who wouldn't explain their concerns. His assistant knocked tentatively. What is it, Diane? He snapped. The catering company for tonight's gala is online too. They say their payment was declined. Bradley froze. That's impossible. Process it again. I tried. 3 times. Diane hesitated. And there's something else. People are returning their tickets for tonight's show. Lots of people. Why? They won't say. But social media. She held out her phone, showing Bradley a rapidly growing Twitter thread. The first post read, heard disturbing news about discrimination at Olympia Theater. Returning my tickets until they address this hashtag boycott Olympia. Hundreds of responses followed. Many mentioned an elderly black patron being denied entry, while others were welcomed. Bradley's face drained of color. Fine, Jessica. Now, as Diane left, his private line rang. The board chairman's voice was clipped. Emergency meeting. My office. 30 minutes. Richard, what's happening? I can explain the social media. It's too late for explanations, Bradley. The chairman sounded defeated. The Olympia has been sold. Sold? To whom? To the man your ticket clerk turned away last night. The line went dead. Bradley sat heavily in his chair, the chairman's words echoing. He pulled up the playbill for Autumn's Requiem on his computer, scrolling to the playwright's biography he'd never bothered to read. Otis Langston's distinguished face stared back at him. The same face that had stood patiently at Jessica's window, asking for tickets to his own play. The same man who now controlled Bradley's professional fate. Crystal chandeliers bathed the Olympia's grand foyer in golden light. White-jacketed servers circulated with champagne flutes. A string quartet played Mozart in the corner. From the outside, the annual fundraising gala appeared unchanged, a glittering celebration of wealth and culture. But beneath the polished surface, panic spread like a gas leak. Bradley Whitman moved between donor clusters, his smile strained to breaking. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Concerned questions about the theater's future, his vague reassurances, their polite but firm refusals to discuss continued support. Richard, Bradley cornered the board chairman near the bar. Half our major donors aren't even here. The others won't commit to anything. What exactly did the board tell them? Richard sipped his scotch. We told them nothing. They already knew. Knew what? That Otis Langston now owns controlling interest in this theater. Richard's voice was flat. And that changes are coming. Bradley struggled to maintain composure. Why wasn't I informed before the sale was finalized? The board vote was unanimous. We didn't need your input. Richard met Bradley's gaze directly. The discrimination incident was the final straw, but your management has been questioned for months. Declining attendance, alienated community groups, programming that ignores our diverse city. I was hired to elevate this theater's profile. You were hired to ensure its success, Richard corrected. Instead, you've driven it to the brink of financial collapse while chasing donors who look exactly like you. Across the room, Jessica hovered near the coat check, desperately trying to blend into the wallpaper. After Martina's revelation that morning, she'd spent hours researching Otis Langston. The more she learned, the worse she felt. Pulitzer finalist, professor emeritus, pioneer for black voices in American theater. And she treated him like an annoying distraction. Jessica, Bradley's voice made her jump. We need to talk. Now. He steered her into a deserted corridor. Tell me exactly what happened with Langston yesterday. Every detail. Jessica swallowed hard. He said he had reserved tickets. I couldn't find them in the system. And I told him we were sold out. After which you immediately sold tickets to someone else, Bradley finished. In front of him, Jessica stared at the floor. I didn't know who he was. That's your defense? You didn't recognize the name of the playwright whose work was literally on our marquee. Bradley's voice rose. Do you understand what you've done? What your actions have cost this theater? I'm sorry, Jessica whispered. Sorry doesn't fix this. Bradley straightened his tie. When Langston arrives tonight, you will apologize personally. Beg for your job if necessary. Make him understand it was your mistake alone. Jessica's head snapped up. My mistake alone. You back me up. You told him and his granddaughter the same thing I did. That's not how I remember it, Bradley said coldly. And it's not how I'll present it to the new owner. Before Jessica could respond, a ripple of murmurs spread through the main foyer. Guests turned toward the entrance, conversations halting mid-sentence. Otis Langston stood in the doorway, immaculate in a tailored tuxedo. Beside him, Zora wore an elegant gold dress that caught the chandelier light. Behind them, Lawrence Washington entered with David Chin and several other business leaders Bradley had been unsuccessfully courting for months. He's here, Bradley muttered. Remember what I said, but Jessica barely heard him. She was watching Otis, his dignified bearing, the respectful nods he offered to those who approached him. Nothing in his demeanor suggested a man hungry for revenge, yet the crowd parted for him as if he controlled the gravity in the room, which Jessica realized he now did. Richard hurried forward, shaking Otis's hand with exaggerated warmth. Mr. Langston, we're honored you could join us tonight. Many here are eager to discuss your vision for the Olympia's future. I'm happy to share that vision, Otis replied, his resonant voice carrying. Though I suspect some might find it challenging. His eyes scanned the room, passing over Bradley and Jessica without acknowledgement. The message was clear. They were no longer important enough to notice. Bradley moved swiftly through the crowd, positioning himself directly in Otis's path. Mr. Langston, he began, extending his hand. Bradley Whitman, theater manager. I cannot express how deeply sorry we are for yesterday's misunderstanding. Otis regarded Bradley's outstretched hand but didn't take it. There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Whitman. Only poor judgment and prejudice. But we'll address that shortly. He moved past Bradley toward the small stage where donor announcements were traditionally made. Lawrence handed him a champagne flute and tapped a knife against his own glass. The room quieted. Ladies and gentlemen, Lawrence announced, it's my privilege to introduce the new majority owner of the Grand Olympia Theater, though he hardly needs introduction to those familiar with American theater. Please welcome Otis Langston. Applause rippled through the room, uncertain at first, then growing as donors realized which way the wind was blowing. Otis stepped onto the small platform, his presence filling the space without effort, the practiced confidence of decades on stage and in lecture halls. Thank you for the welcome. I have history with this theater, some of it glorious, some of it painful. My first play premiered on the Olympia stage in 1968. My late wife's family helped save this building from demolition in the 1970s. Murmurs of surprise spread through the crowd. And yesterday, Otis continued, I was denied entry to see my own work performed, not because my tickets weren't valid, but because the staff didn't believe someone who looked like me belonged here. All eyes turned to Bradley and Jessica. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. That incident revealed a painful truth. The Olympia has lost its way. This theater was built to showcase artistic excellence and human stories in all their diversity. Instead, it has become exclusive, unwelcoming, and frankly mediocre. Bradley flinched visibly. Effective immediately, there will be changes, Otis announced. New management. New programming. New commitment to inclusion, not as a buzzword, but as a practice. He raised his glass. To the Olympia's future. A future where no one is turned away because of how they look or who they are. A future where art fulfills its highest purpose, to build bridges of understanding between different experiences. The crowd raised their glasses, momentum shifting palpably toward Otis. Even those who might have privately disagreed recognized which side history would favor. As applause filled the room, Jessica stood frozen, watching her career crumble before her eyes. She'd be fired before midnight. Her theater management degree would be worthless once word spread, all because she couldn't see past an old black man's skin to recognize his humanity, let alone his genius. Bradley was already edging toward the exit, abandoning her to face the consequences alone. In that moment, Jessica made a decision that would change her life's trajectory. She stepped forward, directly into Otis's path as he left the platform. Mr. Langston, she said, her voice trembling but clear enough to be heard by those nearby. I'm Jessica Monroe. I'm the person who denied you tickets yesterday. And I need to say something that everyone here should hear. The foyer fell silent. Jessica stood before Otis, her hands shaking, but her chin lifted. In her peripheral vision, she could see Bradley frozen mid-escape near the exit doors, horror etched on his face. Mr. Langston, Jessica began again. I was wrong yesterday. Inexcusably wrong. Otis regarded her steadily, his expression revealing nothing. Zora stood at his side, arms crossed, eyes narrowed in protective suspicion. I told myself I was following procedure, Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength. But the truth is, I made assumptions about you based on how you looked. I didn't think you could afford the tickets. I didn't think you belonged here. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing their own biases reflected in Jessica's confession. When I discovered who you really are, Jessica started. That's exactly the problem, Otis interrupted, his deep voice filling the space without needing to raise it. Who I really am shouldn't matter. Whether I wrote the play or sweep the theater floors, I deserve the same respect as anyone else who walks through those doors. Jessica swallowed hard. You're right. And I was wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for my job. I just thought someone should publicly admit what happened instead of pretending it was a misunderstanding. She shot a pointed look toward Bradley, who had inched closer to the exit. Not so fast, Mr. Whitman, Lawrence called out. I believe your presence is still required. Bradley froze, caught between dignity and desperation. After a moment's hesitation, he walked back toward the center of the room, straightening his shoulders in an attempt to salvage his authority. Mr. Langston, he began smoothly, while I appreciate Jessica's candor, I want to emphasize that her actions don't reflect our theater's values. Had I been properly informed, you were informed, Zora cut in. I showed you the confirmation email myself. You dismissed us just as she did. A regrettable misunderstanding. Stop saying that. Zora's voice rose. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination. And everyone here knows it. The tension in the room was palpable. Wealthy donors who minutes earlier had been enjoying champagne now found themselves witnesses to the very discrimination they preferred to believe existed only in abstract discussions about society. Otis raised a hand, quieting both Zora and Bradley. Mr. Whitman, your employment with the Olympia ends tonight. His tone was matter-of-fact, without malice. You've consistently prioritized exclusivity over excellence, appearance over substance. The financial records speak for themselves. Bradley's face flushed. You can't just. I can and I have, Otis replied. The paperwork was finalized this morning. He turned back to Jessica. As for you, Ms. Monroe, Jessica braced herself. Your actions were reprehensible. But your honesty just now shows potential for growth. Otis studied her. What would you do differently if given another chance? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected immediate dismissal, not an opportunity for redemption. I'd start by actually learning about the works we present, she said after a moment. I'd treat every person who approaches my window as someone who belongs here. And I'd recognize that my unconscious biases need constant examination. Otis nodded slowly. Good start. Report to Lawrence's office tomorrow morning. We'll discuss whether there's a place for you in the Olympia's future. Jessica blinked back unexpected tears. Thank you. Bradley stepped forward. This is absurd. You're firing the manager while giving a second chance to a ticket clerk. The clerk admitted her mistake and wants to learn, Otis replied. You're still calling discrimination a misunderstanding. Which one sounds more redeemable to you? A slow hand clap started from the back of the room. Martina, the veteran usher, stepped forward from where the staff had gathered. About time, she said. Mr. Langston, some of us have waited years for this day. You knew who he was? Bradley asked, incredulous. Of course we knew, Martina replied. Those of us who actually care about theater know exactly who Otis Langston is and what he means to this institution. Richard, the board chairman, cleared his throat. I believe this concludes the formal portion of our evening. Mr. Langston will be available for conversations about the theater's exciting new direction. The bar remains open. The crowd dispersed into smaller groups, the evening's drama providing unprecedented conversational material. Bradley slipped away, dignity in tatters. Jessica found herself approached by several staff members, some offering support, others keeping a safe distance as if her mistake might be contagious. Zora watched her grandfather move through the room. Despite having been humiliated at this very theater just 24 hours earlier, he showed no trace of bitterness or triumphalism. Instead, he spoke animatedly about future programming, community outreach initiatives, and educational opportunities. The Olympia was already transforming under his influence. Your grandfather is remarkable, Lawrence said, appearing at Zora's side. Most people in his position would be out for blood. He's playing the long game, Zora replied. Always has. Lawrence nodded. He's teaching lessons that will outlast any revenge. Across the room, Otis was deep in conversation with David Chin and several other investors. Chin leaned forward, clearly captivated by whatever Otis was proposing. I never understood why Grandma left that money specifically for buying the theater, Zora said. It seemed so specific. Lawrence smiled. Eleonora was as strategic as Otis, but with fewer constraints. She knew this day would come eventually. How could she have known? Because she understood that institutions don't change unless they're forced to. Lawrence sipped his champagne. The Wilsons helped save this theater, once with their money. Now Otis will save it with his vision. As the evening wound down, Jessica found herself alone near the coat check, unsure whether to leave quietly or try once more to speak with Otis. The decision was made for her when he approached, Zora at his side. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "tomorrow 9 a.m. Bring ideas, not just apologies." Jessica nodded. "I'll be there." She hesitated. "Can I ask why? Why give me another chance when you could just start fresh?" Otis considered her question. "Because firing you would be easy. Teaching you, and through you, others is harder but more lasting." "I don't deserve it," Jessica admitted. "Perhaps not," Otis agreed. "But deserving isn't always the point. Sometimes opportunity is given not because it's earned, but because it might create something valuable." He gestured toward the grand staircase leading to the theater's main hall. 70 years ago, I wouldn't have been allowed to sit in the main section of this theater. 50 years ago, my plays wouldn't have been performed here. 30 years ago, Lawrence couldn't have joined the board. His eyes met Jessica's directly. Progress isn't just about removing the people who stand in the way. It's about transforming those who are willing to learn. With that, he and Zora turned to leave. Jessica watched them go, understanding that she'd been given not just a second chance at employment, but opportunity to fundamentally change how she moved through the world. In the emptying foyer, the ghost light was brought out, the single bulb that would burn through the night on the main stage. Theater tradition held that it was for safety, or for the spirits of performances past. Tonight, it seemed to signal something else, the light of transformation, bringing long-shadowed corners into clear view. The morning after the gala, Otis arrived at the Olympia before sunrise. He wanted to walk the quiet halls alone, to feel the weight of what he'd purchased not just with money, but with decades of perseverance. His footsteps echoed in the empty grand hall. Light filtered through stained glass windows installed during the theater's 1920s heyday, casting jewel-toned patterns across worn velvet seats. Otis made his way to the stage, the same stage where his words had first come alive in 1968, where the audience had applauded politely, some surprised that such words could come from a black playwright, where critics had praised his work while noting its unusual perspective, as if humanity itself were the sole domain of white experience. He ran his hand along the smooth wooden edge of the stage. "We've come a long way, old friend," he murmured. "But not far enough." At precisely 9 a.m., Jessica Monroe arrived for her meeting, clutching a notebook filled with hastily scrawled ideas. She found not just Otis waiting in the administrative office, but Lawrence, Zora, and several board members she recognized from the gala. "Please sit," Otis said, gesturing to the only empty chair directly across from him. Jessica sat, fighting the urge to fidget under the collective gaze of people who had witnessed her worst professional moment. "Before we discuss your future here," Otis began, "I want you to understand the Olympia's past." Lawrence opened a leather portfolio and removed a series of photographs, laying them on the table. "The Olympia opened in 1918, he explained. Until 1954, black patrons could only sit in the balcony, what was commonly called the buzzard's roost. Even after official segregation ended, unwritten rules kept the audience predominantly white. He slid forward a playbill from 1968. Otis's play Autumn's Requiem was the first work by a black playwright ever performed on this stage. The artistic director at the time faced significant backlash and funding threats for that decision. Jessica studied the yellowed playbill. The young Otis in the photo bore the same dignified expression he carried now, though without the hard-earned wisdom in his eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you can't change what you don't understand," Zora replied. "The Olympia doesn't just need diversity training. It needs to confront its history, all of it." Otis leaned forward. "Which brings me to why you're here. I'm creating a new position, Director of Community Engagement. This person will develop education programs, outreach initiatives, and ensure the Olympia becomes genuinely accessible to all. Jessica blinked in confusion. And you want my input on who should fill this role? No, Otis said simply. I'm offering you the opportunity to apply for it. Stunned silence filled the room. Me? Jessica finally managed. After what I did, precisely because of what you did, Lawrence explained. You represent the problem we need to solve. Who better to help solve it than someone who recognizes their own biases? This isn't charity, Otis added, his voice firm. It's strategy. You'd start at the bottom, learning the history, developing programs under supervision, proving yourself daily. The path to redemption will be long and public. Jessica looked down at her notebook, then back at the faces watching her. Why would you trust me with this? Trust is earned, Otis replied. You haven't earned it yet, but you've earned an opportunity to try. He slid a document across the table. This is a 6-month probationary contract. During that time, you'll work directly with Zora, who's agreed to help reshape the Olympia's community programs while finishing law school. Zora's expression made it clear she'd be a demanding supervisor. If you're not interested, Otis continued, there's a standard severance package. No one would blame you for taking it and moving on. Jessica stared at the contract, understanding the choice before her, the easier path of walking away, or the harder road of confronting her own prejudices while helping transform an institution. I'd like to try, she said quietly. I know I don't deserve this chance. As I said last night, deserving isn't the point, Otis replied. What you do with the chance is what matters. For months later, the Olympia's facade gleamed under summer sunshine, newly restored to its original glory. But the changes inside were far more significant than the fresh paint outside. The lobby featured a new permanent exhibition, the Olympia's complete history, chronicling both the theater's artistic triumphs and its troubled legacy of exclusion. Jessica had worked with local historians to ensure nothing was whitewashed or minimized. On this particular Thursday afternoon, the main hall buzzed with excitement. Rows of elementary school students from the city's most underserved neighborhoods filled the first 10 rows, part of the new First View program that reserved prime seats for young people who might otherwise never experience live theater. Behind the scenes, Otis adjusted his tie as Zora straightened his jacket. You're sure about this? She asked. You haven't performed in, 20 years? 23, Otis corrected. And yes, I'm sure. These children should hear these words from the person who wrote them. Zora squeezed his hand. Grandma would be proud. She always was, Otis smiled. Even when no one else was. In the wings, Jessica directed volunteers, her face flushed with purpose. The past 4 months had been the hardest of her professional life, facing daily reminders of her actions while working to dismantle the very systems that had enabled them. There had been tears, arguments, and moments of profound discomfort, but also growth, unexpected friendships, and the satisfaction of meaningful work. 5 minutes, Mr. Langston, she called, maintaining the formal address that felt appropriate given their history. Otis nodded, taking a deep breath. At 75, he felt the weight of his years, but also their value. All he had experienced, the barriers, the breakthroughs, the losses and victories, had led to this moment. The house lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated center stage. Otis walked out to thunderous applause from children who had no idea who he was, but had been taught that this moment mattered. Good afternoon, he began, his resonant voice filling the hall without amplification. My name is Otis Langston. 60 years ago, I wasn't allowed to sit where you're sitting. 50 years ago, I wrote a play that many said couldn't be performed on this stage. Today, I own the theater. Laughter rippled through the adult section, but the children simply watched, absorbing a lesson about possibility. I'm going to read you the opening scene of that play, Otis continued. It's called Autumn's Requiem. It's about losing something precious and finding something even more valuable in that loss. He opened a well-worn script, the same copy he'd clutched nervously backstage in 1968. The pages had yellowed, but the words remained powerful. As he began to read, his voice transported the audience to another time, another world. From her position in the wings, Jessica watched children lean forward in their seats, captivated by Otis's storytelling. She thought about how close she'd come to turning him away from his own legacy and felt again the shame of that moment. But alongside that shame was something else now: determination. Determination to ensure no one else would face what Otis had faced. Determination to make this beautiful theater truly open to all. In the back row, Lawrence sat with David Chin and other new investors. Their funding had helped accelerate the Olympia's transformation, drawn by Otis's vision of a theater that could change its community while remaining financially viable. Remarkable, Chin whispered. For months ago, this place was dying. Now there's a waiting list for tickets. Lawrence nodded. Because Otis understood what the others didn't, exclusivity isn't just morally wrong, it's bad business. The future belongs to those who welcome everyone. On stage, Otis finished the scene to enthusiastic applause. As he looked out at the diverse young faces before him, he saw not just an audience, but a future, one where stories like his would be told not as exceptions, but as essential parts of a greater whole. The Olympia Theater, like Otis himself, had faced rejection, weathered storms, and emerged stronger. Not unchanged, but transformed. Not perfect, but striving. And in that striving lay the greatest performance of all. 6 months to the day after Otis Langston was turned away from the Olympia's ticket booth, a line stretched 3 blocks from the theater's entrance. People of all ages and backgrounds waited excitedly beneath a marquee announcing, "Grand reopening, a new beginning." Inside, Otis surveyed the transformed lobby, where staid portraits of white benefactors once hung. A vibrant mural now celebrated the diverse artists who had shaped American theater. Display cases featured costumes and props from groundbreaking productions. The scale model showed the theater's evolution through decades of architectural changes. 10 minutes until doors open, Zora announced, clipboard in hand. The mayor just arrived, and 3 news crews are setting up. Otis nodded, adjusting his bow tie. At 75, he found himself more energized than he'd been in years. The past 6 months had been exhausting but exhilarating, renovating the physical space while simultaneously reshaping the theater's culture. "Where's Jessica?" he asked, giving final instructions to the front-of-house team. Zora's expression softened slightly. "She's been here since dawn." Jessica Monroe's probationary period had ended 3 weeks earlier. The board had unanimously approved her permanent appointment as Director of Community Engagement after reviewing the impressive results of her initial programs. School participation had tripled. Community workshops were consistently oversubscribed. The theater's social media following had exploded with authentic engagement rather than performative diversity posts. More importantly, the Olympia felt different. Staff members from custodians to artistic directors now shared a common purpose and understanding of the theater's complete history, both its triumphs and its failures. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have believed this possible, Lawrence remarked, joining Otis near the new accessibility ramp. Not the renovations, the transformation of people. People can change when systems change, Otis replied. We just had to change the system first. The system had indeed changed dramatically. Bradley Whitman's replacement as managing director was Martina Johnson, the veteran usher whose institutional knowledge had proven invaluable during the transition. The board now reflected the city's demographics. Programming balanced classics with new voices. Ticket prices included sliding scale options to ensure economic diversity in the audience. Jessica approached, slightly breathless, her staff badge prominently displayed. Despite her promotion, she had insisted on working directly with frontline employees today. We're ready, Mr. Langston, she reported. Everyone knows their positions. Otis studied her face. No longer the dismissive young woman who had turned him away, but someone humbled by consequence and strengthened by purpose. Thank you, Jessica. And I think after these 6 months, you can call me Otis. Jessica shook her head. Not yet. I haven't earned that. Her honesty was refreshing. No pretense of instant redemption, no expectation that 6 months could erase what had happened. Instead, a commitment to the ongoing work of growth. Very well, Otis said with a small smile. Let's open the doors. The lobby filled quickly with excited patrons, many visiting the Olympia for the first time. Community leaders mingled with major donors. Theater students clutched programs like precious artifacts. Children darted between exhibits, their energy infectious. Mayor Thompson made her way to Otis, cameras tracking her movement. "Mr. Langston," she beamed, shaking his hand vigorously. "The city is grateful for your investment in this historic institution." "The investment isn't just mine," Otis replied. "It belongs to everyone who believed the Olympia could be more than its past." His gaze drifted to a quiet corner where an elderly white couple stood examining a display. The woman leaned heavily on a cane, her husband's arms supporting her. "Excuse me," Otis said to the mayor, moving toward the couple. As he approached, the woman turned. Despite her advanced age, Helen Whitfield's eyes were sharp with recognition. "Otis Langston," she said, extending a fragile hand. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me. How could I forget the first director brave enough to stage my work?" Otis clasped her hand gently. "Helen Whitfield, you changed my life." Helen's husband nodded respectfully. "She changed many lives, and nearly lost her job doing it." "Worth every threat," Helen declared. "When I read Autumn's Requiem, I knew American theater needed your voice. I just didn't expect quite so much resistance." Otis gestured to the surrounding activities. "What do you think of the changes?" "Long overdue," Helen replied, her voice quavering slightly. "Though I admit, when I heard you bought the Olympia, I expected you might tear it down after how you were treated." "I considered it," Otis admitted. "But destruction is easy. Transformation is harder and more lasting." A chime sounded, signaling 15 minutes until curtain. The crowd began moving toward the main theater doors. Jessica appeared at Otis's side. "We should take our positions for the ceremony, Mr. Langston." Helen raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Langston? Rather formal for the owner, isn't it?" Jessica met Otis's eyes, an unspoken understanding passing between them. "It's a reminder of history," she said simply. "Both personal and institutional." On the main stage, beneath a single spotlight, Otis addressed the packed house. Every seat was filled, from the luxurious orchestra section to the once segregated upper balcony. 75 years ago, my father brought me to this theater," he began. "We sat in the highest balcony, the only seats available to us. I was 7 years old, experiencing live theater for the first time." The audience listened in rapt silence. During intermission, I slipped away from my father and wandered downstairs. I wanted to see the stage up close. A patron found me near the orchestra section and summoned an usher. I was escorted back upstairs with a stern warning to remember my place. Otis paused, his gaze sweeping across the diverse faces before him. On the bus ride home, my father noticed my tears. When I explained what happened, he didn't react with anger. Instead, he said something I've never forgotten. "If you want to change where you sit, you have to change who owns the theater." A ripple of understanding moved through the audience. Tonight, we celebrate more than renovations or new programs. We celebrate a fundamental shift in who this theater belongs to. Not just me as its owner, but all of you as its community. He gestured to the wings, where Jessica and Zora stood with the entire staff. The Olympia's story includes chapters of exclusion and discrimination. We acknowledge that history not to dwell in shame, but to ensure it never repeats. The true measure of this institution will be how it serves those previously turned away. As applause filled the hall, Jessica watched Otis stand a little taller, a little prouder. She remembered their first encounter, how she dismissed him without a second thought. How that single moment of bias had altered her life's trajectory. How his response to injustice had created opportunity rather than simply punishment. The house lights dimmed. The curtain rose on a production of Autumn's Requiem featuring a cast that reflected the city's diversity. Otis had personally supervised a revival, insisting that the play's universal themes of loss and redemption be honored while allowing a new generation of actors to find their own truth in his words. In the darkened theater, as his dialogue filled the space, Otis felt Eleanor's presence beside him. She had always believed this day would come, had set aside resources to make it possible, had trusted him to know when and how to use them. "We did it, my love," he whispered. "We changed who owns the theater." And with that ownership came not just power, but responsibility. The responsibility to ensure that no one, regardless of race, background, or appearance, would ever again be told they didn't belong in these seats, on this stage, or in this story. The real performance, Otis knew, wasn't happening on stage. It was unfolding in the hearts and minds of everyone witnessing this transformation. And it would continue long after tonight's applause faded away. 1 year later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the Olympia Theater's facade. A new addition gleamed beside the historic structure, a modern education wing with floor-to-ceiling windows revealing bustling activity inside. Above its entrance, bronze letters spelled the Eleanor Wilson Langston Center for Theatrical Arts. Inside the center's main classroom, Jessica Monroe watched 20 high school students rehearse scenes they had written themselves. The teenagers represented neighborhoods from across the city, many from communities that had rarely seen themselves represented on the Olympia's stage before. "Remember, your voice matters," Jessica reminded a shy girl who had whispered her lines. "Theater is about being heard." The words felt both professional and personal. Jessica had spent the past year finding her own voice, not just as an administrator, but as someone publicly reckoning with privilege and prejudice. Her journey had been documented in a series of candid blog posts that had gone viral in arts education circles. A knock at the classroom door drew her attention. Otis stood in the doorway, leaning slightly on a wooden cane he'd recently begun using. "Don't stop on my account," he said to the students. "I'm just here to observe." But the teenagers knew exactly who he was. His photo hung in the center's lobby alongside a timeline of his career. His plays were part of their curriculum. More importantly, they knew the story of how he had transformed the theater after being turned away from it. "Mr. Langston," called out Deshawn, a talented 16-year-old from the city's south side, "would you give us some feedback? We're doing scenes about moments that changed our lives." Otis glanced at Jessica, who nodded her approval. He settled into a chair at the back of the room as the students resumed their work with renewed energy, aware of the legendary playwright in their midst. After the class, Jessica and Otis walked slowly through the education center. Student artwork lined the corridors. Rehearsal rooms hummed with activity. Community members of all ages gathered for workshops and discussions. "The board meeting starts in 30 minutes, Jessica reminded him. "Zora said she'll meet you there with the financial reports." Otis nodded, pausing to rest beside a large window overlooking the theater's entrance. The infamous ticket booth where he'd been rejected was gone, replaced by a sleek electronic kiosk and a welcoming reception desk staffed by diverse employees. "How are you feeling about tonight?" Jessica asked. "Nervous," Otis admitted. "I haven't directed in over 20 years. Tonight marked the premiere of Otis's first new play in more than a decade, inspired by his experience at the Olympia. He had not only written it but returned to directing, a decision that had garnered significant media attention. "The rehearsals have been extraordinary," Jessica assured him. "And the symbolism isn't lost on anyone, your new work opening exactly 1 year after you return away." Otis smiled slightly. "Eleonora always said I had a flair for the dramatic, even off stage." They continued toward the administrative offices, moving at the measured pace Otis's age required. Along the way, staff members greeted him with genuine warmth rather than the nervous deference of the early days. He had become more than an owner or a famous name. He was a mentor, a teacher, a daily presence in the theater's renaissance. The boardroom was already filled when they arrived. Lawrence Washington sat at Otis's right hand as board chairman. Zora, now the Olympia's legal counsel while maintaining her separate law practice, reviewed documents at the far end. Representatives from community organizations, arts foundations, and local businesses filled the remaining seats. "Before we begin," Otis announced once everyone was settled, "I have a decision to share with you all." The room quieted immediately. "As you know, today marks 1 year since the events that led to my purchase of the Olympia. It has been a year of tremendous change and growth. Our attendance has increased 60%. Our education programs reach 5 times as many students. Our finances have stabilized." Nods of agreement around the table. "I believe the Olympia is ready for its next phase of evolution," Otis continued, "which is why, effective after tonight's premiere, I will be stepping back from day-to-day operations." Murmurs of surprise filled the room. Zora looked up sharply. "Not retirement," Otis clarified with a slight smile. "I tried that once and failed miserably." but a transition to a different role. I will remain as chairman emeritus and focus on creative endeavors while a new executive team takes the reins. He turned to Lawrence. Lawrence Washington will continue as board chairman. Lawrence, who had been forewarned, nodded solemnly. Zora Langston will become chief legal and community officer, expanding her current responsibilities. Zora appeared momentarily stunned before composing herself professionally. And Jessica Monroe, Otis said, turning toward her, will be promoted to executive director of the Olympia Theater. Jessica froze. This hadn't been discussed. This couldn't be right. Mr. Langston, she began, finding her voice. I don't think. For the last time, Otis interrupted gently. Please call me Otis. The room fell silent, understanding the significance of this moment between the two people whose confrontation had sparked the Olympia's transformation. I can't accept this position, Jessica said quietly. Not with our history. Not with what I did. That history is precisely why you're the right person, Otis replied. You understand both sides of the Olympia's story, its failures and its potential. You've earned the trust of communities previously excluded, and you've demonstrated exceptional leadership in building our education programs. He addressed the wider board. A year ago, Jessica made a terrible mistake. She spent every day since then working to understand that mistake and to ensure it never happens again, not just for herself, but for our entire institution. Lawrence leaned forward. The board has unanimously approved this appointment, Jessica. We've watched your work closely. Your journey from that incident to now is exactly the transformation we want the Olympia to represent. Jessica looked around the table at faces that once regarded her with suspicion, now offering confidence. At Zora, whose initial cold fury had gradually transformed into grudging respect and eventually genuine collaboration. I don't know what to say, Jessica admitted. Say yes, Otis suggested, and then get back to work. We have a premiere tonight. Hours later, as the audience filed into the renovated theater for the world premiere of Thresholds, Otis stood in the wings watching the house fill. Every demographic was represented, from wealthy longtime patrons to first-time theatergoers attending through community access programs. Zora joined him, resplendent in a gold dress reminiscent of the one she'd worn the night of the gala. Nervous? She asked. Terrified, Otis confessed. It's been so long since I premiered a new work. The critics are already calling it your masterpiece, and they haven't even seen it yet. Otis chuckled. Critics said the same about Autumn's Requiem until they actually saw it. Then they called it provocative and challenging, code for makes white audiences uncomfortable. Times have changed, Zora reminded him. People have changed, Otis corrected. Because they chose to. The house lights dimmed. The familiar hush of anticipation swept through the audience. Otis felt a lifetime of theatrical moments compress into this single breath before the curtain rose. On stage, the play began, the story of an elderly black playwright confronting discrimination at a theater featuring his own work. But far from a simple retelling of Otis's experience, Thresholds expanded outward, following multiple characters as they crossed boundaries of understanding, moving from ignorance to insight, from defensiveness to growth. In the pivotal scene, the playwright character confronts the ticket seller who turned him away. But instead of public humiliation or righteous victory, their encounter becomes a difficult, honest conversation about unconscious bias and institutional racism, about how systems perpetuate prejudice even when individuals believe themselves fair-minded. From her seat in the audience, Jessica felt the weight of every word. Otis had transformed their story into something universal, yet achingly specific. He had given theatrical life to both the pain of discrimination and the challenging, imperfect path of redemption. The final scene showed the playwright returning to the theater, not as an angry victim demanding justice, but as a catalyst for transformation. The closing line, delivered directly to the audience, resonated through the hushed theater. The true measure of justice isn't punishment for what was done, but transformation of what could be. As the lights faded to black, a moment of profound silence held the audience still. Then, as if a dam had broken, applause thundered through the hall. People rose to their feet, many wiping away tears. Otis stepped onto the stage for his bow, leaning slightly on his cane but standing tall in his accomplishment. The applause grew deafening as the cast joined him, each actor embracing the playwright before stepping back to let him have his moment. From the wings, Jessica watched the man she had once dismissed receiving the recognition he had earned over decades. She thought about how close the Olympia had come to losing his contribution forever. How a moment of bias might have permanently severed a relationship that had instead become transformative for an entire institution. At the after-party, as champagne flowed and critics cornered Otis with their initial rapturous reactions, Jessica found herself beside the display case housing the original Autumn's Requiem playbill from 1968. "Full circle," Lawrence said, joining her. "From being turned away to triumphant return. It doesn't erase what happened," Jessica replied. "No," Lawrence agreed, "but it gives meaning to it. Otis has always understood something many don't. Our worst moments don't have to define us if we use them to create better ones." Across the room, Otis was deep in conversation with Helen Whitfield, the director who had first staged his work at the Olympia decades earlier. Despite her advanced age, she insisted on attending tonight's premiere. Their heads were bent close together, two theatrical pioneers who had helped reshape American theater. "You know why he's stepping back now, don't you?" Lawrence asked. Jessica shook her head. "Because his work here is done. He didn't buy the Olympia for revenge or even for justice in the usual sense. He bought it to transform it into what it always should have been, a place where everyone truly belongs." Lawrence gestured around the diverse crowd, celebrating in the theater that had once been an exclusive domain. "Look around. This is Otis's real masterpiece. Not the plays, remarkable as they are. This community. This belonging." Jessica watched as Otis made his way toward them, accepting congratulations but clearly on a mission. When he reached them, his eyes were bright with the satisfaction of artistic success. "Otis," Jessica said, testing the name that had taken a year to earn the right to use. "The play is extraordinary." "Thank you," he replied. "But I have a more important question. Have you accepted the executive director position yet?" "I still don't understand why me," Jessica admitted. "After everything," Otis's expression softened. "Because you remind me of myself at your age, learning hard lessons about how the world works and determined to change it. Because you've done the difficult work of confronting your own biases instead of denying them. And because the Olympia's future should be led by someone who understands both its failures and its possibilities." He glanced at his watch. "The critics will publish their reviews by morning. The real review that matters is already evident in the audience's reaction. My work here, this phase of it, is complete." Jessica recognized the moment for what it was. Not just a job offer, but a passing of responsibility. A trust being placed in her hands. "I accept," she said. "And I promise to honor everything you've built here. Not just what I've built," Otis corrected. "What we've all built together, including you. Especially you. The person who made the mistake had to be part of creating the solution. That's how real change works." As the celebration continued around them, Otis gazed up at the Olympia's ornate ceiling, the same ceiling he'd admired as a 7-year-old boy sitting in the segregated balcony. The theater had stood for over a century, witnessing the city's evolution through war, depression, civil rights struggles, and cultural shifts. Now it would stand for centuries more, not as a monument to exclusion, but as a testament to transformation, to the possibility that even our worst moments can become catalysts for our best futures. All because one elder turned away at the ticket booth, refused to accept that rejection as the end of the story. That brings the story to a close. Otis didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand to be seen. He simply let the truth speak louder than pride or anger. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that quiet strength can move mountains. What they tried to deny him became the very thing he used to rebuild something better for everyone, not just himself. Was justice really served in the end? Let's talk about it below. We're all ears. If you're still listening, you already know stories like this don't come often. Hit that subscribe button and keep the momentum going with the next story.